My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Phyllis Fagell, who is going to be talking to you about super belonging, helping kids connect and find their place in the pack. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be back. Just going to share my screen. While I write about middle school, I do want to say that I work with kids of all ages, and there is nothing that I'm going to talk about tonight that doesn't apply to every kid and probably every parent as well. And it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because, especially at a time when everyone has been talking about a mental health crisis, one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of the times what we're really seeing is an inability to connect or lagging social skills. And once we can target that desire to be able to make friends, the feeling of belonging, finding your place, a lot of the other things tend to fall into place as well. So I'm going to share a lot of really, really practical, concrete skills and strategies that you can teach your own kids. In my second book, my new one, Middle School Superpowers, I identify these 12 skills. And part of the reason that I am so interested in talking about belonging tonight is that it's foundational. You almost can't acquire any of the other superpowers or skills that kids need until you have that psychological safety, until you feel like you belong and that people want you to be there and that you have people you can confide in and trust and people to do things with. So I want to start by sharing some of the things that I'm hearing from kids. The first one is I've always been nice to her, but she's so mean to me. One of the things that is so bewildering to kids is when a friendship just changes overnight. I was recently talking to a boy, a fifth grade boy, who was heartbroken that some of his friends had moved on, and he wanted to figure out why they had moved on, why they had lost interest in him, and what he had done wrong and what he could fix. And it's very, very hard to explain to kids that sometimes there's nothing you've done wrong and there's nothing to fix. And the only thing you can do is really regroup and shift your attention to a different set of friends. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a few slides. The next one here is she'll hang out with me one-on-one, but she never invites me to do stuff with her other friends. This is another common complaint. Kids work so hard to find their group, the people that they can really connect with. And sometimes they're so afraid of jeopardizing the cohesiveness of that group that they won't pull in someone new, even if it's someone they really like, someone that they'll make plans with one-on-one. And while it feels personal, it's not personal. She's so clingy and needy. I had a student once tell me that she felt suffocated because every time she went to a friend's house for a sleepover, the second she walked in, that friend would say, "This is so fun. Can we do it again next weekend?" And she had always been taught to be nice and to be kind, and she really didn't know how to set healthy boundaries. Meanwhile, the other kid didn't know what was appropriate and might be crowding somebody else and actually driving someone away. So much of this is actually about fundamental social skills. I can't just invite him over. Many times parents will, in a very well-meaning way, say, "Why don't you just text him and see if he can come over this weekend?" Or "Why don't you just make plans?" And what kids will tell me is that adults don't understand how many steps there are before they can take such a big social risk as simply inviting someone over. It's simple to us as adults, but it can be very, very difficult for kids. They also may not know how to do it. I spoke to another parent recently who is watching her son try to make plans with a group of his friends, and they all liked one another. This is a kid who had a nice group of people to hang out with, and they very much wanted to see each other. And they would text, "Hey, we should do something." And the other friend would text back, "Yeah, let's go somewhere." And the other one would say, "Yeah, maybe we'll go to the shopping center." And this was going on. And all of a sudden, the mother realized that they didn't know how to seal the deal. They didn't know how to actually make the plans. She had to teach him how to say things like, "What time are we meeting? Where are we going? Who's taking us there? Who's bringing us back?" And we want to make sure that we're teaching kids how to connect with other kids the same way we teach young kids how to tie their shoes. I have school friends, but no real friends. And I'm going to return to this concept in a minute, but often kids have a really hard time understanding what reasonable expectations are of their peers. They might be expecting somebody to invite them, let's say, to a birthday party who is just a school friend, somebody who we would call an acquaintance. Why does he have to make everything a competition? And this is something that I hear more often from boys. They feel a lot of pressure to keep up with one another, and it can often feel like too much, like a burden to them, but they don't necessarily know how to express that. I'll give you an example. This was in my last school about a year ago. The PE teacher gave the kids Fitbits and told them to count their steps. And I didn't know this. All I knew is that for the next few hours, for reasons I had no clue about, sweaty fourth grade boys, like their hair plastered to their head, kept running by my office. Meanwhile, no girls were doing it. They were wondering what the boys were thinking. And really, it was this desire to keep up with their friends, and that can be really challenging as well. There are some gender differences that the research shows. Girls are much more interested in closeness, social approval. They tend to travel in smaller packs. They don't want to risk conflict. They might not, let's say, run for student council if a friend says they want to do it and they don't want to step on their toes. They often tend to assume the emotional burden of caring for everybody around them, including their male friends, who might more readily lean on girls than on boys. And they tend to struggle more with perfectionism and worry more about making mistakes, body image, things like that, that also can get in their way socially as well. Meanwhile, boys it's a different dynamic. They're more likely to step on the heads of the people below them to try to get some status. They really want to win. If you ever watch kids play video games, you know what I'm talking about. They're more likely to be verbally or physically bullied. They are much more concerned about maybe conforming to norms related to masculinity, appearing stoic or uncaring, and they're less likely to know how to ask for help if they're lonely, or how to be a supportive friend, be that trusting friend, even though that's something that they very much want from their friends as well. So let's talk about how we can actually support kids in really concrete ways. The first one here is to play what I call the maybe game. And this is about helping kids develop cognitive flexibility. We never want to talk them out of their feelings. We couldn't if we tried. So if your child comes home and they tell you that someone excluded them or looked at them funny, or maybe a teacher used a sharp tone, it could be anything where they're going right to that worst case scenario. That's where the maybe game can come into play. Ask them to come up with at least one, preferably two or three, alternative explanations other than someone was seeking to wound them or seeking to make them feel bad or seeking to exclude them. And this is key. You have to tell them they don't have to believe the alternative reason that they come up with. And I'll give you an example from a student who was sent to my office. It was on a Monday. He had been acting out, he was dysregulated, and eventually the teacher sent him to me to figure out what was going on. And when I spoke to him, what I learned was that he had still been smarting over something that had happened the Friday before. He had learned that 4 of his closest friends had all gotten together without him, and they had excluded him. Not only was he worried that they had excluded him, he had made the leap to think that they didn't want him there so they could talk badly about him all night. So he was really suffering, and by Monday he was in a lot of pain. And I asked him to come up with an alternative reason other than they wanted to talk about him or they wanted to exclude him. And he had a really hard time. He eventually sat down and started writing. And he said, well, maybe what happened is that they were all at baseball practice, and because I'm not on the team and they're all on the team together, maybe they just got together afterwards, and it's not that they left me out, it's that they didn't think about me at all. And then he paused and he looked up and he said, "Oh my God, I think that's what happened." And he felt better. I happened to get lucky in that situation, but that wasn't my goal, wasn't to convince him that he was wrong. My goal was really to help him consider the possibility that people meant well. The next one here is it meanness, bullying, or emotional discomfort? And let me share the difference between the three. So bullying, which is a situation where kids really need outside support from an adult, is the 3 Ps. There's a purpose, somebody's trying to wound you. There's a pattern, it's not a one-off comment, it's happening more than once. And there's a power imbalance. So it's 3 against 1, or older versus younger, or somebody who doesn't have many social skills, who's being picked on by somebody with a lot of social capital. Meanness is when you have 2 kids on equal footing and they're saying unkind things to one another. Those are the situations where kids can handle it themselves, typically. You can coach them, but they usually can handle it themselves and will learn from that experience. But 99% of the time, what I see, and it doesn't matter what grade it is, whether it's kindergarten or high school, it's emotional discomfort. And I'll explain what emotional discomfort is. Emotional discomfort is when you walk into the cafeteria and nobody beckons to you to sit with them right away and you feel unwanted. Emotional discomfort is when someone doesn't invite you to the party and you wanted them to invite you, forgetting the fact that maybe you didn't even invite them to yours. Emotional discomfort is when your friend who you really like hanging out with suddenly also wants to hang out with another girl who you don't like at all. So when your kids come home and they start talking about how they're feeling, you want to be figuring out which category it falls into and labeling it for them, because the solution will be different as well. Similarly, loneliness is in many ways a form of emotional discomfort. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody was mean to them or that somebody's excluding them. You can be perfectly comfortable in one situation and lonely in another. Classic example that I hear is the kid who feels really part of the pack in school, but on their travel soccer team or their travel lacrosse team, where everyone goes to another school, they don't feel like they belong and they feel lonely in that setting. So really paying attention to what it is that they're struggling with. While you're checking in, what you don't want to do is mine for misery or dig for dirt or interview for pain. We want them to really be able to think expansively. Again, this is about cognitive flexibility. So if you know somebody was mean to them, it's very tempting when they come home the next day to say, was so-and-so mean to you? Try not to start with that. Try to ask more open-ended questions. And if they bring that up, then you can have a conversation about what they experienced and go through the details. Sometimes what you'll hear is that it doesn't really involve them at all. It really isn't their drama. It might feel personal because it's a close friend of theirs and they're hurting for their friend. They might feel like they are part of it because someone shared gossip with them. But I'm constantly trying to help kids extricate themselves from situations in which they're not a core player. All kids right now need to conserve their energy, and it's really, really draining to take on other kids' personal fights or conflicts. If they can stay out of it, you want to help them figure out how they can extricate themselves. Going back to this idea of school friend or real friend, if your child comes home and they're upset because someone isn't including them or didn't offer an invitation to something that they thought they should have been included in, talk to them about what kind of relationship they have with that person. Often what I hear is that this is somebody who they have a great relationship with at school. Maybe they eat lunch with them, maybe they hang out with them at recess, but it's somebody who's never been a guest at their house. It's someone they've never done something with outside of school. And while they're feeling hurt, you can reframe it for them as an opportunity. You can say, I'm hearing that you're hurt, but what I'm also hearing is that this is somebody you'd really like to get to know better. This is someone you'd like to be a friend. It's more of a school friend or an acquaintance right now. So let's talk about how we can help this person become closer to you so that you can have that relationship that you're seeking. And then the last one here is talk about the downside of having a best friend. I completely understand the appeal of a best friend. I had one myself growing up. Of course, like all best friendships, it had its rocky moments. And in those moments, I would feel adrift, much as my students today feel like they are lacking a social safety net when something goes wrong in that best friendship. But that's actually not the main reason that I'm opposed to the idea of a best friend. The real reason I don't love the idea of a best friend is because kids are drawn to people just like them. It's a lot easier to connect with people who you have a lot in common with, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the research shows that the kids who are happiest and feel that great sense of belonging in high school and beyond are the floaters, the kids who can talk to anyone. And the only way you can be a floater and talk to anyone is if you develop the skill and the interpersonal skills to be able to talk to anyone. If your child is really spending the bulk of their time with one person, they're not getting that kind of practice. We want to really be encouraging them to branch out. All right, some more ways to acquire super belonging. First is to really understand what we're up against when it comes to what is commonly called peer pressure. It's kind of a misnomer because peer pressure sounds coercive. And the way peer pressure works is that it's really behavior contagion. You are who you're with. So if you're hanging around people making good choices, you're more likely to make good choices. If you're hanging around kids who are nice to other kids, you're more likely to be nice to other kids. And the reverse is also true. And interestingly, if boys are around same sex, same age boys, they're more susceptible to that negative peer pressure. So if your child doesn't feel great about how they're showing up in the world or how they're interacting with other people, if they think that maybe they're wrecking other friendships that they might have, maybe older, longer standing friendships, talk about the decisions of the people around them and how that might be influencing them. The next one here relates to rigidity, kids who really have a hard time owning their part in a conflict. And I see this the most actually with kids who really like each other, because if you don't like each other, you're not going to have it out. You're not going to bother wasting energy fighting with somebody you don't care about. So kids who really care about each other can get into the biggest battles. And what you want to do is help them let down their defenses. So you might say something like, I hear you. It sounds like it's completely that other person's fault. But if you had to own your 1%, what would that be? And if you can get an answer to that question, you're going to get some really good information and you can work with that to help them figure out what they need to do to retool. You also want to ask them about a tiebreaker vote. So if you have two kids and they both are, locking horns and they can't come to any kind of agreement, ask them to give the friendship a vote. If the friendship could say what it needed, what would it say? And one time when I had two boys who were fighting over who was better at video games, they said, well, the friendship would probably say, this is pretty stupid. We should just let it go. And then they actually laughed and they were able to let it go. And I think they were both relieved. I talked about the importance of teaching concrete social skills. Some of it is the how do you make plans, that kind of social skills. Some of it is things like how do you enter a conversation? So one of the hallmarks of the last few years is that in the past, kids would come to me feeling awkward, feeling like they didn't have the social skills to connect, and they were awkward. What I'm seeing now is that everybody feels awkward, even kids who to an outsider or to an adult observer look really socially adept and have lots of friends. Everybody is feeling that way. And so I've said things like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to walk up to a group and I want you to listen to what they're talking about. And when there's a break in the conversation, ask a question related to that topic, because everyone loves answering questions. I've had to do a lot of telling, and often this is boys. If you want to be part of a conversation, you actually have to say something. They sometimes have this erroneous belief that if you stand in that scrum of kids, you're part of the conversation, even if you don't say a couple of words. But you do, you have to say a couple of words. And you can even brainstorm topics to ask about. We did an evening at my school where this was for sixth grade parents and sixth grade. My school's all boys now, so it was boys. And as an icebreaker, the boys had to ask an adult they didn't know 3 questions about themselves or learn 3 new things about the adult and vice versa. And I paired up with one of the students and I said, do you want to start? Do you want to ask me a question about me? And he said, okay. And then he looked at me blankly. And then I said, do you want me to go first? And he said, yes. So I asked him a question like, do you have any siblings? And then I said, okay, your turn. And he asked me the same question. And it really hit me that something as simple seeming as asking questions, finding things out about other people, showing that kind of curiosity, which is so important to interpersonal connection, is not something that comes naturally to almost anybody. It's a skill that has to be acquired. So you can ask your child to come home, see if they can find out 3 new things about someone at school. It could even be a close friend. Sometimes they may not know very much even about their close friends. Or if you're hanging out with another family who has a kid they don't know, help them brainstorm some questions they could ask that child to learn about them. That's another way to help them connect. Giving compliments is also super powerful, especially since kids are so egocentric and so insecure, and helping them understand what an authentic compliment is, that it's not necessarily commenting somebody on their water bottle or how good they are at math. It's about noticing something that really makes them unique, or something that is really going to make that person light up and feel seen. So these are the kinds of concrete social skills we want to be teaching. You also want to interrupt meanness in real time. Often kids will say something that's meant to be funny and it will land mean, and they're as surprised as anyone else that it came out the wrong way. So much of what feels like meanness to kids is actually social clumsiness related to that lack of social skills. Help kids understand that if they say something that's meant to be funny and the other person stiffens, or their smile fades away, or suddenly they fall silent, that maybe it didn't land the way that they had wanted to land. And then help them think about what they could say, like, oh, maybe that didn't come out the way I meant it to. Give them a way back into that conversation to make it right with that other person. If you hear the meanness, pause and call it out. And by the way, if your child has even one or two friends, they're sometimes mean. All kids are sometimes mean. You can say, can you repeat that, just to make them sit with it a little bit longer? You can say something like, I'm surprised to hear you say that. You've always liked that person in the past. Or if it's two kids in your carpool who are plotting something, you can say, what do you think will happen if you do that? If you're spot checking their group text chain and see something not so kind, pause and comment on that as well when you get a chance. We really do want to help them be their best self, because there's so much research showing that if kids don't develop the skills of likability, if they instead use power and aggression, or meanness and aggression to get power and status, they have poor long-term outcomes. In the same way that a kid who's targeted suffers, a kid who is mean and doesn't learn those skills has higher rates of addiction later on, has more failed relationships, less higher education, more job instability. So there are a lot of really compelling reasons to help them develop those listening skills, that generosity, that reciprocity, and talk about their friendships and whether they exhibit those skills within those friendships, and whether the other person does as well. We want to be strategic if they're really struggling. So if there's a kid who is a lot for any particular friend, and if you have that child, you know who it is. Often it's kids who have ADHD or who might be on the more impulsive side. Those kids tend to be better off having lots of very brief, structured hangouts with friends, rather than really long face-to-face conversations where they're bearing that burden of carrying on a dialogue. We want to be setting them up for success. And the last one here is to help them avoid burning bridges. So I'll share a story. This was about a couple of elementary girls, and for a long time they had been fighting, and it was getting kind of nasty. They were both mean to one another, and both dads were getting really upset about it. They had prohibited the girls from having sleepovers. They were calling the school. They both thought the other girl was bullying their child. The girls had decided to take a break. I fully supported the break because nothing good was coming of their interactions. It was just getting uglier. And then one day they came to my office and they said they had a problem. And I half jokingly said, how can you have a problem? I thought you were taking a break. And they said, no, that's not it. That's not the problem. The problem is we want to be friends again. And I said, how is that a problem? And they said, the problem is we don't know how to break it to our dads. So really helping kids understand that those friendships, no matter how combustible they are, they may actually want to be friends again. So try not to burn bridges, just create some distance, maybe take a little longer to text back, or only hang out in school and don't have sleepovers, whatever you have to do to get that space you need. And we as parents also need to let our kids forgive and move on as well. Sometimes it's shocking to us that our kids will want to go back and be friends with somebody, especially if that person was mean to them. But the research does show that kids can change. If a child is mean, they can become nice. Power dynamics shift. All of that happens so much in these years, and we want to allow them that growth and allow them to reinvent themselves. All right. Moving on to boundaries. And this is something that girls tend to struggle with more than boys. like the sleepover story that I shared with you, sometimes helping them come up with policies. Let's say they have a friend who is very, very needy or is constantly burdening them with emotional issues, a fight they may have had with somebody else, and your child doesn't know how to get off the phone or doesn't know how to tell that person it's getting to be too much. They might have a simple policy like, I never check my texts after 8 o'clock, or with this particular friend, when she asks me something or writes me something that she needs, maybe I wait a couple of hours and see if somebody else picks up fills that need for her first. Anything that helps them establish those boundaries in a way that feels comfortable. We also want kids to understand that part of setting those healthy boundaries is for them. It's too much for them. Often kids will have problems that are too much even for an adult who doesn't have specialized training. So really explaining to kids that they may, in fact, by supporting and helping this friend who's draining them, they may actually be preventing them from getting the help that they need from somebody else. All right, I want to talk about taking social risks and how we can help our kids do that. Uh, just as an aside here, never say do your best to a perfectionist, because there's no such thing. One of the ways we can help them take a social risk, maybe send somebody a text, or even getting up in front of your classmates to give a presentation, is a social risk. Raising your hand in class is a social risk. I think we forget that academic risks are social risks too. And risk taking is transferable. If you can take a risk in one area, it transfers to another. So we're trying to build their courage muscle, especially so that they can have that sense of belonging, so that they can connect. If they're really anxious about trying something, ask them to rank that risk on a scale of 1 to 10. And if it's a 10, ask them what a risk in that 4 to 7 range would be. We want to also reframe their anxiety as an opportunity to get something that they want, to set a brave goal, to really specify what it is that they're hoping to gain from taking this risk. And the reason we're trying to get that risk in the 4 to 7 range is because we want to get them a little bit outside of their comfort zone so that they can see that they can do hard things, but we don't want to push them too far or too fast, because if it doesn't go well, then they'll never want to try that again. Sometimes just taking one small step is all they need to keep going. So if they are afraid to ask somebody to sit at a lunch table with them, something that seems like, again, shouldn't be a major risk, but feels like a major risk to them. Maybe the starter risk is that they try to make eye contact with that person in the hall and then work their way up to having a conversation with them, maybe asking them what period they have lunch, if they have different lunch times of day, and then finally getting to the point where they feel like they can sit with them at lunch. Similarly, you have to be able to have a conversation with somebody before you can invite them over to your house. Inviting someone to your house is also a risk. A lot of kids really feel fearful of being the host. They're afraid of being the person who bears the responsibility for making sure someone else has a good time. So sometimes plotting out in advance what they can do at that hangout, maybe they're going to decorate cookies, maybe they're going to go mini golfing, can help take away some of that pressure that they're feeling. And tell your child that rather than say to a friend, what do you want to do? In which case, often you'll have this back and forth, I don't know, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Help them offer that friend two choices, two very specific choices instead. Often that can help them move the dial to real engagement. If you see them making any progress whatsoever, take a moment to celebrate it, mark it, tell them you're proud of them for taking that risk. The one thing we don't want to do is say something like, why don't you ever invite anyone over? Or don't you have any plans this weekend? Kids are so afraid of letting adults down or disappointing them or seeming like they're lacking in some way. So we want to strip away that pressure they feel to please us and instead feel like they're pleasing themselves and that we really see them, that we see that this is hard and that they're trying. The last one here is practice and perform in similar conditions. So let's say they want to try out for a soccer team or try out for a travel team, and they're really afraid to do it. Maybe they're afraid they'll embarrass themselves in front of their friends and that will hurt them socially. Maybe they don't know anyone and they're afraid to go because they feel awkward. Take them to the place where the tryout will be. Have them kick a soccer ball around. Anything you can do to take away some of that unknown will help them, the research shows, get over that fear of choking, get over that awkwardness that they're experiencing. Okay, let's see here. The other thing that can get in the way of their ability to connect with other people is self-consciousness and just insecurity. So we want to really be building them up. One of my favorite questions to ask a kid, especially if they're telling me that they have some perceived flaw, something about themselves they really don't like, it could even be something like, I'm really awkward. I ask them to come up with 2 hidden strengths in that so-called weakness. I did this activity in a whole class setting. It was actually a class of about 10-year-olds. And I said, what do you think kids are insecure about? What do you think some of the things they worry about? And this one kid who was really brave and who was overweight raised his hand and he said, I think kids are insecure if their body is bigger than other kids' bodies. And I said, okay, can anyone think of a couple of hidden strengths in that perceived weakness? And this other girl raised her hand and she said, well, I'm insecure that I'm really underweight, and I have a feeling that you would be somebody who would really be kind to me and would understand that. And then she also said, you'd be the first person I would pick if I had to play a game of tug of war. And she was being completely earnest, and it was really, really sweet. And he immediately turned around and said, well, you get to fit through small spaces. And it's part of the reason I love kids. They always bend over backwards. Once you kick off that cycle of positivity, they will bend over backwards to make someone else feel good. Cognitive offloading is the simple idea that you take everything that you're holding in your head and you take it and write it down on a piece of paper. And it applies a lot to academics like homework and things like that, but there's a social connection. Kids are not only walking around with all of the assignments and things that they need to remember for school, they're also walking around with all of the emotions that they're carrying. The fear when they raise their hand, the fact that somebody elbowed them in the hallway and they're trying to figure out if that person meant to elbow them or just accidentally jostled them. The fact that 20 people told them they liked their haircut and one person said that the haircut was a little strange, and discounting the positive and only focusing on that. And cognitive offloading and having them write down everything they need to do allows them to clear up more space to deal with all of the emotional stuff they're dealing with. It's a really simple strategy. Another thing you can do relates to social media. For those of you whose kids are using technology, it could also relate to gaming or any kind of technology use. And this comes from Lori Santos, who teaches a happiness course at Yale. It's the 3 W's: what for, why now, and what else. The what for is, what are you using the technology for? Is it to do homework? Is it to FaceTime with grandma? Is it to scroll through somebody else's Instagram feed and see if they're leaving you out? The why now is, why are you doing it? Are you lonely? Are you bored? Are you procrastinating? And the what else is, what could you be doing instead? And maybe that something else that you could be doing is homework or sleeping, or it could be trying to connect in real life with a friend. Maybe you really are feeling a desire to connect, and that's what's leading you to want to play video games or look at other people's feeds. Second, the next one here is, how is social media working for you? So if you're insecure and you're feeling bad about yourself, you're less likely to put yourself out there to take those social risks. So I really want kids to be mindful about how their social media use is impacting them. If they're getting on and they're just laughing and watching animal videos, fine. But if they're getting on there and maybe they're on Snapchat and they realize nobody is wishing them a happy birthday or liking the post that said that it's their birthday and that's making them feel rejected or excluded in some way, maybe it's not the best way for them to spend their time if they want to preserve their sense of self. And then maybe they can take it off their home screen or turn off their alerts or just be more mindful of how often and when they use it. I'm going to skip to this positive post-its for a second, because this is another way to bolster their sense of self and to challenge their negativity. It's very similar to the maybe game, except instead of challenging their assumptions about what other people are thinking about them, it has to do with challenging their own inner self-critic. So what you have them do is grab a bunch of post-its and have them write down on individual post-its everything they can think about themselves that they like. and it can be superficial, it can be deeper. If they're struggling, they can write down something their friend likes about them, or something that you like about them, or somebody that they, know loves them would say about them. And then what you tell them is, when they find themselves relentlessly criticizing themselves, and when I run worry buster groups, I'm always shocked by how horrible kids bully themselves. And they're shocked when they hear that their friends are doing the same thing. When they catch themselves doing that, tell them you want them to read at least 5 of those positive Post-it notes, because it takes 5 positives to make up for 1 negative. And you can tell them they're probably not going to believe those nice things about themselves in that moment when they're beating themselves up. But again, they're learning to think more expansively. They're challenging that negativity, and that can change the way they talk to themselves in the long run. And then the last one here is what goes into a balanced day. And we want kids to be mindful of how they're spending their time and whether it's serving them. So the rock, pebble, sand metaphor that I use for kids to help them understand this concept is that, imagine a jar, and the rocks are the must-dos, school and sleep. And pebbles are the should-dos. Maybe that's sports practice or an after-school job. And then the sand is the want-to-dos, and that could be talking to friends or, getting online. And what I always tell parents and kids is that the want-to-dos are really important too. The problem is that if you try to do those first, you can't put the rocks and pebbles in a jar that's filled with sand. But if you put the rocks and the pebbles in first, you're always going to have room for some sand. And we do want to make sure they have room for some sand, because if they don't have time to just be chilling out and hanging out with friends, they're not going to be able to meet those social needs that are so intense and important, or develop the social skills and practice those social skills that they need to be successful in every arena, including school. As I said, academic risks are social risks too. So, mindful of time, I'm thinking maybe I have time for one more, and then I'll turn it over to questions. Supersight is the ability to predict how the way you behave today is going to work out for you tomorrow, or how much work you do today will impact what you produce tomorrow. And kids don't have the ability to do that kind of future planning until they're about 15. It's very, very hard for them to make good decisions in the moment. They need time for their signal to reach their prefrontal cortex, to go from that fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain to the more rational problem-solving part of the brain. Half of the time, in order to preserve kids' friendships and relationships, I'm telling them to just wait 10 seconds before they post anything or say anything. Another exercise you can do if they're online is go through their texts or go through their posts with next to them. You go through yours, they go through theirs. Ask them to find one that doesn't fit, that seems aberrant in some way. Maybe they told a lie and they got caught in the lie, or maybe they disclosed a lot about themselves and then they felt exposed, or maybe they tried to be funny and it landed mean, or maybe they can see that they were much sillier than usual because they were, with people they didn't know as well, or trying to impress. And then ask them what the conditions were at the time they made that post or sent that text. You can even use real life examples if they can come up with one. And the idea is to help them consider the conditions that lead them to make decisions that they're going to regret, or that might hurt their friendships. Maybe they were overtired, or maybe they were jealous, or maybe they were angry, or maybe they were cut from a team. Once they know what it is that got in their way, they can be really mindful about what they do and when they do it in the future. Can print out a values list like Brene Brown's Daring Greatly list and have them go through and choose their top 10 values. You can do the same and talk about them with them, and then explain that when they're in a quandary and they're not sure what the right thing to do is, they can always pause and ask themselves which decision is most aligned with their core values, the things that are important to them. Odds are it will strip away all that interference I talked about, that jealousy and anger and other things that can get in the way of making pro-social choices. And then I like to ask them, if you make that choice that's aligned with your values, do you think you'll be happier with that choice or the other choice in, 3 days, 3 hours, 3 weeks, 3 months? That's temporal distancing, helping them project forward. And when I do that with kids, they almost always tell me that they would be more comfortable with that values-driven decision. So they're not always going to make good decisions. They're not always going to choose good friends. They're not always going to feel a sense of belonging. They're not always going to feel comfortable, and that is okay. But there's so much that we as parents can do to help them acquire the skills they need to ease the discomfort in those moments, to recover and to shift when things aren't going well, and to learn from those experiences. So I hope you can leverage all of these strategies to help your kids. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Charlene and stop sharing so we can turn to questions.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. That was an amazing amount of really great, really practical advice, parents. I don't think I've heard so much practical advice in 45 minutes ever, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Fantastic. As somebody who's taught young children and worked in this program now for almost 20 years, I know that what you're saying really works. It's not easy. I mean, you're asking people to do real work to help their children become better friends and learn how to make friendships, but it's worth it. So here's just to start, I wanted to ask you, we heard a lot about social relationships regressing through the pandemic. Are you still seeing that kids are behaving in a younger way, or do you feel like they're catching up?
I'd say there's about an 18-month lag.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're catching up. I don't want to be doom and gloom. Everybody is, they're still behind, but they are acquiring new skills. So rather than saying they're behind, I guess I would say they're where you would expect them to be, given the fact that they had disruption.
Yeah. And do you think, is that most prevalent, like coming from elementary school into middle school, or is there some transition that's been hardest?
You know, I see there's certain grades where I see it more. I think the kids who missed out on, second, third, fourth grade really missed out on a lot of skill building that we take for granted. I always call third grade the first seventh grade. It's like Lord of the Flies in there because they don't yet have the empathy. So if you don't get that practice, when you hit seventh grade, it's going to be a lot rougher. So I think the year that kids miss does have some role to play.
I think so. We felt bad for the middle school kids who were like, well, where are the balls? Where is recess? Right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I see it even in, I had a student the other day who didn't, it was a seventh grader, but he didn't want to take his hat off because he really didn't like his haircut. And he was embarrassed and upset. And there was something about the way he presented that really struck me as being younger, but not atypical for other kids in his grade. And so recognizing that they also haven't had as much time to build up their confidence. It's not just the skills, it's the ability to recover from things like a bad haircut. They just haven't had as much of that. These were kids, many of them wore masks even when they returned to school.
It's not that easy. We had one of our presenters who'd gotten a bad haircut, and I realized we couldn't tease him about it. He was very sensitive.
That's really funny. My co-counselor, one of my co-counselors, he shaved his beard, and a kid went up to him, and this was maybe a fourth grade boy, and he goes, "Why did you do that? You look so ugly." And my co-counselor said, "Well, thank you." And then he said, "Actually, that hurt my feelings." And the boy said, "It did?" Like it really, and that's what I'm really always also trying to reassure kids, that what seems like meanness or an attempt to hurt somebody else often is just cluelessness and social clumsiness.
Yeah, yeah, just like you said. And they don't know unless somebody calls them on it, right?
Have to teach them.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, Phyllis, we're going to roll it back here for a second. A question about what is the 1% you were talking about giving the friendship a vote? What did you mean by that?
So those are two sort of different but related things. If you've got, let's say you've got two kids locking horns, they're just mad at each other and they won't let it go, and you kind of know they both want to let it go. An example I gave was that one kid wanted the other kid to say that he was better at video games at Fortnite, and the other kid wanted that kid to say that he was better at Fortnite, and it was dumb. And so when they could not resolve it, I said to them, "All right, it's a stalemate. Let's give the friendship a vote. What would the friendship say it needs to survive?" And they both said the friendship would say we need to let it go. The 1%, it relates to the fact that kids often have a really hard time taking accountability, and that can get in their way socially. And so if you can see that your kid is having a hard time socially because they're rigid, because they're inflexible, because it's always somebody else's fault. And you deep down know that your child probably is playing a role. You can say, I hear you. It's sounds like it's really that other person's fault. But if you had to own your 1% of the problem, what would you say your 1% is? And you're helping them be less defensive so that you can get some insight into what might be getting in their way.
Okay. Phyllis, does that work for a neurodivergent child who may have trouble with flexible thinking?
I think it can work. I mean, you have to experiment and see. I always say that trying strategies with kids is a little like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And sometimes you just have to, with some kids, they're so rigid that you have to help them see that it's in their best interest, even if it's not what they want to do. So what is the outcome you want?
Mhm.
Do you think that this is going to get the result that you want?
You may have to sometimes do what they want to do.
Yes, and one way you can practice that at home is, let's say they're rigid at home too, and it's their way or the highway. You can try something where you each come up with ideas of maybe what you're going to do as a family, and you write them on slips of paper and you put them in a bowl, and they choose something that they want to do, but they think other people might want to do. You choose something that you want to do, but think that your child might want to do, and you take turns doing each person's thing. And that's a way you can practice that at home.
I like that. It's like the family night where you pick what game to play or what food to eat or
Yes.
something, right?
Yes, because parents often default to just letting the kid do what they want and we're just having time together. But if you have a kid who's rigid, you can practice taking turns at home.
Okay, good advice. I like that, Phyllis. Okay, here's a parent with a situation I think happens often. She says, my daughter is in elementary school, and recently she seemed to lose many of her best girlfriends, maybe due to winter travel break. How can I, as her mom, help her to win those friends back?
So I think it depends on why the friendships drifted and also probably the age of the kids. If it's later elementary school, like fifth grade, or some elementary schools go through sixth, it's going to be much harder to win them back because odds are there's nothing she did wrong.
Hmm.
So if it's much younger kids and it's just natural, they were separated, they were in different places, people were on vacation, and nobody's mad at anybody, it's just that drift. The easiest thing to do is simply invite people over one at a time and cement those relationships. I'm amazed by how few kids actually invite people over anymore.
Is that right? Not
Yes, it's not happening, but everybody wants to be invited. And so the easiest way to make friends is to be willing to be the host, and people's lives are complicated. So I would tell parents, don't worry about reciprocity. If you have to always invite them and that's serving your kid and you're able to do it, that's fine. It could be that the other family doesn't have the ability to drive them or the flexibility to host or doesn't have a situation where they can host. So just letting go of normal rules of reciprocity until your child feels like they have peers that they can hang out with, and just bearing the burden of being the house where kids come. Even offering to give people a ride can really give your child an assist along the way. And if you have a carpool for something like a sports event, taking them out for ice cream afterwards or extending that time together, or creating some one-to-one time on the heels of some other activity can help too.
okay, great suggestion. So, kind of in that vein, here's a good question. What do you think about organizing a play date on behalf of a child who seems too shy to do it themselves? Is that helpful or does it hurt in the long run because they may not learn those skills?
Did they have an age?
Um, Probably elementary school doesn't say, but the fact that the a parent is calling it a play date.
Yeah. Um, I think in elementary school you can still help, but it's like the I do, we do, you do approach. You want to start teaching those skills. So what you might do is say, let's make plans and have them sit next to you and let them and model for them how you do it. I also think it's really powerful to talk to your kids about how you make plans with your friends and how you invest in your friendships, especially dads with boys, if they want to model for their boys what a trusting friendship looks like, to let them see you checking in on a friend or texting a friend or wondering how they're doing or expressing concern. And actually making plans to go out and see them and talk to them. I think the more they see you do it, the more they'll naturally pick up on that skill. It's not intuitive for a lot of kids, and a lot of kids are shy, and they may need you to do that if they're going to be able to connect, but you can still be modeling how to do it.
All right. So here's a related question, Phyllis. Parent asks, you've been talking about taking social risks, but how do you help your children take academic risks?
So almost the same way. Again, the risk taking is transferable. My favorite question is to first get a sense of how big of a risk it is for them. So to ask them to rank it on that scale of 1 to 10. If they say it's a 10, or if you have a middle schooler, they're going to say it's like a 2010. There's no such thing as just a 10. Then talk to them about what would be a comfortable risk. One of the stories I share in my first book, Middle School Matters, was about a bunch of girls. This was shortly after I got to my last school, so several years ago, walked into the bathroom and a bunch of girls were crying. And I was like, what is happening? And it turned out it was the day they had to give a presentation in class. It was called a Tiny TED Talk. They each had to do a videotaped 3-minute soliloquy about some very personal part of their life for their entire class, which sounded terrifying to me too. And I completely understood why they were in a puddle of tears on the floor. And so I did that exercise. It was 2010 for all of them. They were sobbing. So I said, let's talk about what is at risk in the 4 to 7 range would look like. And they each had different answers. I think one of the mistakes we make is to decide what that comfortable risk looks like, or to impose upon them our assumptions about what's risky or not risky. And they came up with lots of different things. One of them came up with, well, I'll do it as long as I don't videotape it, for posterity. Another one said they would do it, but only if they didn't have to memorize it. Another one said they would do it, but they would only do it with their back to the class, which to me sounded worse than the original assignment. But the goal is to help them figure out what's comfortable and keep moving the dial. I'll give another academic example that relates more to anxiety. If you've got a kid who's afraid of test taking, which is a pretty common fear in the school setting, you want to figure out why they're anxious. Often it's something like, well, I can hear, if you can really delve into it, it might be something like, well, I can hear other people flipping pages and I get anxious that they're moving faster than I am and I'm not going to finish in time. And what I noticed, especially in one of the public schools where I worked, the 504 plans would say things like, well, this kid has anxiety for test taking, so we're going to have them take that test in another room, with no plan for getting them back into the classroom. And so for any risk, you want to be thinking about, what does that progression look like? Well, maybe they're in another room at first, but then they're in the room, but sitting with their back to the rest of the class, or at a distance away from people flipping pages. So figuring out what it is they're afraid to do, why they're afraid to do it, and then setting up some kind of progression and really celebrating any incremental progress. If it's math or art, you can even keep a portfolio and track their progress, so that when they get discouraged, you can look back and say, look at what you did.
All right. So as always, parents, wonderful questions coming in with just a few minutes to go. Let's see how we can do, Phyllis.
All right.
Quick, okay? This is a great question. Any advice on what to tell a 15-year-old boy who's very shy and doesn't feel comfortable saying hi even to his friends? He waits for his friends to notice him or say hi to him first.
Yeah. So first of all, in my private practice, that's like every kid I see.
Yeah, he's not alone. He's not alone.
He's not alone. I joke that there are a lot of 15-year-old lonely boys out there right now. And one time I jokingly suggested to him that he stuff his pocket with a couple of small balls, and like at an outdoor break, just take the ball out of his pocket and hold it up and see if anyone came over. And I was only half joking, and he kind of tried something very similar, and it did draw people to him. But the other things that helped him were things like finding someone else who is equally introverted, who wanted to play online chess in the library. Okay. That was an incremental risk. Or finding a teacher who is willing to host him with another kind of quiet kid in the classroom during lunch. And this is an opportunity. This would be a situation where I would enlist the school, if you could, for some suggestions or common interests. And if the school doesn't have something like spike ball or like a big Jenga kit outside or something, like that they can do. Those are things that can be supports. Jenga would be for more younger kids, but spike ball is really, really popular for high school kids too. And it gives them something that they can do without having that burden of conversation that they can just join in on.
Yeah, God forbid they should have to talk to each other.
I mean, it's terrifying.
I know. They'll get there. Okay.
Get there. Yes.
Writer asks, my daughter in 6th grade says she feels lonely. She's new in a big school where most girls already have their friend groups. Any advice on how to help her feel less lonely?
You know, I would first be urging patience, that it takes time. You know, and so at one of the schools where I worked, we had a big military population, a lot of in Washington, D.C., so there's a lot of transient people, and a lot of my 6th graders or 7th graders or 8th graders who would come in the middle of middle school would come in feeling that way. And I always promised them that they would feel better by February vacation, which you're almost there. And I don't know if you've seen any improvement. You probably have moved the dial a little bit. But if by February you're still not seeing any improvement, I would be talking to the school and seeing if there are other new kids. Sometimes there's like a new student group, or there's welcome families, or you could do a potluck with another family that's also got a new student, finding out from the PA or from the school who those other families might be, just to get that one connection going. Trying to break into a group isn't going to work. That's going to be really, really hard. Trying to find it an individual at a time is going to be a lot easier.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. So last question. At what point do you decide, hey, maybe it really is my kid who needs some therapy or help after these ideas are exhausted? When do you know, Phyllis?
You know, I think the simplest question to ask kids, that no kid is going to come home. No kid's going to really come home. Very few kids will come home, especially boys, and say, Mom, Dad, I'm lonely.
Yeah.
But ask them if they're lonely and talk to them about how you can support them. And all of those social skills that I was sharing and those tips, helping them connect, helping them actually initiate a plan and follow through on a plan, helping them figure out what they're going to do if they're the host, figuring out what is getting in their way. And if all of that isn't working, maybe you might need to talk to a speech pathologist if there's some kind of like a language processing that might be getting in their way. There are programs. I know ADHD Dude runs a 1-week program in Arizona for kids that people go from all over. In my area, there's somebody who runs a week-long camp in June and then again in July for kids, where it's experiential programming to teach social skills, but it's not build a social skill groups. It's really experiential. They do 1 day is a ropes course. One day is a scavenger hunt. So looking for some organic activities where they can connect with people that are more structured and organized can help as well. And if none of that is working, then I would say, and they're lonely, then probably individual therapy as well.
All right. Well, Phyllis Fagell, this has been incredible. You have given so much great advice. A lot of parents are asking for the video. I know that they want to show their partners, their friends, their sister, whoever. So again, Phyllis Fagell, author of the new book, Middle School Superpowers. Everybody pick up a copy. We just talked tonight about one of the superpowers, which is really belonging and friendship, but there's 11 more. So there's a lot more content in that new book. Thank you, Phyllis, for everybody. Thank you for all your kind emojis and for being with us tonight. Great audience. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. Good night.